friend and I would sometimes roll trails.
Well, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to the first of our virtual summer speaker series. This talk will be recorded, just so you know. So along with Reverend Jen Latham, I'm one of the co-chairs of the Diocesan Creation Care Environmental Justice Task Force, which is now called Kahuola. And a little about this speaker series. This year, with the help of Reverend Jazzy Bostock from the Native Hawaiian Ministry Task Force, we applied for and received a Creation Care grant from the Episcopal Church. With this grant money, along with members of Ho'imi Pono and the Native Hawaiian Ministry Task Force, we've planned a year-long emphasis on creation care, which we are weaving through all the diocesan events for the year. These events included spring training, this virtual summer speaker series, and it will also include a Malama Aina volunteer event for Education Day. So you can find out more about all these events on the diocesan webpage. We've called this year-long project Huli, which means to turn, to change, to reverse course as a manner of living. It's also part of the kalo plant that is replanted. So Huli then is a project to turn our hearts and our hands and our minds to the ground and water beneath us, to the diversity of voices around us, and to Indigenous and Native Hawaiian wisdom, particularly in this place. So our summer speaker series, which will begin momentarily, begins today with the distinguished Dr. Kamana Beamer, who I will introduce shortly. On Saturday, July 26th, the Reverend Rachel Tabor Hamilton will speak. She is an Episcopal priest and a Shaken First Nation person. She formerly served as the elected vice president of the House of Deputies. And on Saturday, August 2nd, we are thrilled to welcome Robin Wall Kimmerer, author of Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teachings of Plants. She is a botanist, a well-known author, and a member of the Potawatomi Nation. Hers will be a pre-recorded talk with a live Q&A afterwards, and the title of her talk is What Does the Earth Ask of Us? So all these talks are on Saturday, and they all begin at 9 a.m. Hawaii time. With that, I'm going to introduce our first speaker. Today, we are honored to welcome Dr. Kamana Beamer. Dr. Beamer is a full professor at the University of Hawaii Manoa, serving a dual appointment at the School of Hawaiian Knowledge and in the School of Law. His research interests and publications focus on Indigenous agency, governance, Native Hawaiian land tenure, Hawaiian resource management, and land and resource law of the Hawaiian Kingdom. He collaborates internationally on the study of the circular economy, exploring how Aloha Aina as an Indigenous philosophy and the circular economy as a modern economic approach can inform each other in enacting systemic economic change and transitioning to a more sustainable and equitable society. He puts this knowledge to practice in his role as president and one of the 14 co-founders of the Aina Aloha Economic Futures, which is an initiative with the goal of uplifting Hawaiian values to guide economic recovery efforts. Dr. Beamer has served 2 terms as a commissioner on the Hawaii State Water Resource Management Commission. He also served as president and chief executive officer of the Kohala Center. He served as the director of the Aina-based education at Kamehameha Schools and the director of Stanford University's First Nations Futures Institute. Dr. Beamer has revitalized and maintained Lo'i Kalo, providing him and his children opportunities to malama Aina, to deepen connections with cultural traditions and derive leadership lessons from the land. He is an Oiwi, Aloha Aina, farmer, author, songwriter, advocate of the circular economy, and now serves as UH's Dana Naone Hall Chair at the UH School of Hawaiian Knowledge. His most recent book, which is also the title of today's talk, is Vai Vai, Water and the Future of Hawaii. We are pleased and very honored to welcome and hear mana'o today from Dr. Kamana Beamer.
Na mai, aloha mai kākou. O nauna I tahala me talehua. E halelehua no yanata no e. Tau no ia no inei. Eli anei ho I o tahiti ma. Hiti mai no tau. Hiti pu no me te aloha. Aloha e. Aloha e. Aloha e. Aloha mai kako. It's an honor and a privilege to be here with you folks in what sounds like a fantastic summer journey in Malama Aina and in Huli. And I know you folks will have some great talks. So I'm going to go ahead and get it started out. In the process of the collaboration, I revamped my title a little bit and my talk slightly to try to frame, I guess, the perspective where I'm coming from, and perhaps it'll build some context for your future engagements. But the first thing is to make sure the technology works. So let me try to share screen here. And are you guys seeing my slide okay? Does that work? Okay, fantastic. So let's see if it changes. So I want to thank the Hui for hosting me. Jazzy, I don't know if it's true. Social media is strange, but I swear I saw a post that she just had a baby. Is that for real? Because I was going, whoa.
Yes. I'm her spouse. Last week, you may hear him crying, but I'll stay muted.
Oh, oh, wow. Okay, okay. This is amazing. I'm gonna actually I have a picture of my youngest shortly after she was born. So yeah, I think this will maybe come full circle. Congratulations. Yeah, so I'm gonna start this talk in framing, bringing my grandmother into the room. I'm not sure if anyone, this is a strange thing about Zoom, but perhaps some of you might have crossed paths with her. Winona Kapua Iluhia Manona Kalani Deshe Beamer. I'm the only grandchild of my grandmother. And kind of cool in a way, in Hawaiian traditions, we have this thing called punahele. And, it's sort of like, I think it's a function of being in a society where you're trying to pass down traditions and knowledge systems, and families and parents and grandparents are kind of observing kids and figuring out what their aptitude is, and then certain adults will kind of select them as punahele in a way, and that means favorite, and doesn't mean they don't love the other children or anything like that, but there's this real special bond and relationship. So I often say, I was punahele by default. There was no competition. I was the only grandchild, and it was a fantastic place to be. But this phrase "malamako aloha" comes out of the words of Anali'i Manono during this really pivotal battle and period in Hawaii's history called the Battle of Kuamo'o, where the future of Hawaii and our traditions and our sort of metaphysical religious beliefs were all in question. And at least the way my grandmother, I won't tell you that whole story, but at least the way my grandmother translated this "malamako aloha" to cultivate, to keep your love. And my grandmother would say, keep your love, keep your love. There's no obstacle for Hawaii if you keep your love. So so it's an honor to follow my grandmother and to, honestly, I'm 47. I'm still trying to make her proud in everything that I do. So I keep her close and with me. The first time I saw Tutupele, I think I was maybe 12, 13. I should go and do the actual math, but I was somewhere in there. And Kalapana was burning on Hawaii Island. Maybe some of you remember this eruption. And I'd never experienced Tutupele before. So in the middle of the evening, my grandmother kind of commandeered VW bus. She got some of her friends to pack us in, and we drove out to Kalapana. And the first thing I remember about the experience, other than people laughing and having good fun in the van, was the smell. There was just this, the sulfur, the burning, something that I had never smelled before. And then as we got closer, I could see the the lava, the glow kind of flowing down from the slopes. And then if you've seen it at night, there's really nothing like it. That color, that glow, that fire, and deep red. And my grandmother, said, do you see that? You see the tutupele, the pele coming down. That's noke, And there's a chant, Lapaku kavahine au pele kahiki, oaka e kalani noke no, oaka e kalani noke no. And my grandmother would do this chant often, but it talks about the flow and the paths of Pele. And my tutu said, there's nothing that can stop her. Anything that gets in her way becomes hers. And she leaves something new behind, in that process. And she said, we gotta noke, like in our family, we have to noke no, we have to be like the Pele, we have to persevere, we have to, And so these are some of the values that I try to carry on and carry with me, and pass it on to my keiki. So I'm a father of 5 children. Turns out when you're the only grandchild, it's a lot of pressure. So you want to create some new branches for the family. So my kids can share that collective responsibility. It's beautiful. But this is my youngest. This is Hi'imaka Manono. Ke kua iluhia o manono, ke li'i kua aina kapali beamer. She's actually 18 months old now. This is a picture actually shortly after she was born. So I'm sleeping better now. She's 18 months. Teething's pau. I'm coming back into life, but having 5 children just basically means 12 years of my life I was sleep deprived. But when they're at this phase, when they're so young, and Brianna, I mean, there's nothing like a newborn coming into the world, and that that love and that experience. And I think what it really reminds me is just how vulnerable we are coming into the world. We're so dependent on the love of the people around us, And some of the things I'm going to talk about, I think, are, I can't quite rectify and comprehend how we start out so vulnerable, so needing connection. And we look around us today as adults, and we see, the rise of fascism, of just ultra profiteering, the destruction of natural systems in nature for commodities, for profit, mostly driven by ego and greed. And yet all of those people that manifest those values and systems in our world today started out like this, So I'm going to frame some of our history in Hawaii, so we have kind of a collective context, and then I'll go into some of my work on circular economies. But I really want to kind of position where we are, and kind of how we got here. So so in Hawaii we had a beautiful, amazing history. Maybe some of you know it. We had this period where our ancestors were engaging with, the outside world, appropriating tools and technologies, creating new forms of music with slack key guitar, appropriating maps like we see here. This was a map created by a gentleman, brilliant Hawaiian geographer, S.P. Kalama, made in Lahaina Luna in 1838. And it's one of the first maps that really, show our ancestral place divisions, our palena, and just a fantastic example of this kind of period of creativity and growth. in the midst of a period of depopulation, as our people were, dying of diseases, we were also appropriating tools and technologies. Um, Another example of those appropriations were, shortly after the written word becomes formalized in the 1820s in Hawaii, in part by Opu Kahaia, who was a Hawaiian that had been codifying it while he was, in seminary on the American continent, and then brought back, on that American mission, initial ship. As soon as our ancestors get a hold of the written word, and Kauikeoli grants, the missionaries the right to stay for a while to teach, in particular, writing. It's amazing. We codify our ancestral genealogies and traditions. And so we're using the written word in ways, yes, we learned Christianity and other things, but we also used it to preserve our ancestral knowledge systems. And here's an example of that. This ancient genealogy called the Kumuhonua, that really starts to kind of eventually manifest itself as kind of a form of Hawaiian national identity and national consciousness. This idea that Hawaiians come out of the Aina, of a common ancestry from Haloa. And what's interesting is these genealogies, prior to them being published, weren't really out for the masses. They were more known by certain classes of ali'i and things. So kind of an interesting time and period. Coming through those engagements, and by the 1840s, our ali'i had understood the effects of colonization across the world. In 1840, there's this Treaty of Waitangi where Aotearoa is, sort of ceded and claimed by the British Crown, and Tahiti in 1842, Queen Pomaire, and so Hawaii's trying to figure out, how do we preserve our cultural, political independence and autonomy in a dangerous world at that time period. And so they appropriated international law. I can go into a deep star on this. Maybe if there's questions, people want to get into it more. But basically, they become recognized as an independent sovereign state through a diplomatic mission going across the American continent to Europe, Britain, and France. And that is achieved on November 28th, 1843. And it's kind of cool. This is a document I found when I was in grad school finishing my PhD. It's in the United Kingdom National Archives. And we didn't really have it here before. So Hawaii becomes an independent sovereign state. So Austria-Hungary Treaty, the Belgian Treaty, Bremen Treaty, Danish Treaty, French Treaty, German Treaty, British Treaty, Hamburg Treaty, Italian Treaty, the Japanese Treaty, Dutch Treaty. Thank God for the Portuguese Treaty. Brought some of my ancestors here. Russian Treaty, Samoan Treaty, Spanish Treaty, Swiss Treaty, Swedish-Norwegian Treaty, and American Treaty. And so by any measure, a fully functioning, independent and sovereign state with, consuls and international affairs and agreements kind of across the known world. And of course, that government is overthrown and kind of occupied by the United States. And, I think Hawaii in many ways suffered from fascist alternative facts long before Trump was a US president. In 1893, there was a small committee of white settlers in partnership with US Minister John Stevens that kind of lead to this overthrow of the government. The act was called an act of war by 2 US presidents. We were apologized in 1993 by Bill Clinton, and Hawaii really becomes ground zero for like a new period of American imperialism, expansion, and militarism. Our people didn't sit back. Sorry, I think there's some. Our people didn't sit back and kind of watch this happen, so we resisted, and the people at the time were incredibly politically astute and put together a petition drive. These petitions went to U.S. Congress, as well as note of them got to Britain, and I read about that in some of my work. So they were trying to maintain, Hawaiian independence, and because of this fierce activism and political astuteness of Kanaka in the 19th century, There's still no treaty of annexation between Hawaii and the United States. But those that took control of the Hawaiian Islands and the resources after the overthrow were not merely interested in securing themselves profits in Hawaii's economic future. They were also intent on systematically destroying Hawaii's ancestral economic systems and national consciousness. But we're not gathered here today to talk about the past. We're here to really discuss this collective future, and I want to devote kind of the rest of my talk towards Hawaii and this future. But I will say, this particular quote I found again when I was finishing my PhD. I'd been in the archives every day for like about 6 months, and it's I don't know really the words to describe it, but as a Native Hawaiian indigenous researcher trying to uncover the truths of our history, and at the same time forge like a better future for our people in Aina together. When I read this, like it hit me so hard, and I got emotional, because the idea of obliterating someone's past is just pretty well. We see some of those sentiments, I think, re-emerging today. But what I realized was it never happened. Like our past was never obliterated. I saw the faces of my great grandparents and my grandmother, and I thought about their struggles to keep our language and culture traditions alive. And I realized, like, it never completely happened. And the idea of someone like me being in the archives, researching, recovering this work, and forging, a new future for Hawaii is just kind of wild. So I'm giving you a little bit of my my background and my relationships and emotions is to kind of understand, I think, what drives me and what frames the work that I do. So I'm 47 now. That's almost hard to say. I can't believe. I remember people, like, they seemed so old when you were young, and you said they were in their 40s. But when I was a kid, I envisioned pretty much the decade of 2020. I thought was going to be utopian. I imagine most people of my generation might have predicted some kind of place that included the Jetsons, in flying cars, a global society in the likeness of John Lennon's, Imagine. And when I was a kid, there was nothing better than mango season and pickled mango. So maybe mango for everybody. But as we understand today, the harsh and bitter reality is that these are times of unprecedented change and crisis, unprecedented political change, and in addition, at home and abroad. And I think we face kind of a collective problem. These are the structures, I think, that we have to look in the face and challenge and contest. I don't have any exact answers except to speak the truth to power and to look them in the face. And I think the convergence, and it's not just in the United States, it's really happening across the world right now. So in Hawaii, so-called progress and the linear capitalist economy, whose roots began in imperialism, slavery, patriarchy, and the gross conversion of vast resources and life-giving ecosystems of Mother Earth into commodity and capital, empowered demagogues who championed the promise and progress of the plantations that stole water from streams to line the pockets of the few at the expense of our ancestral food systems, ecosystems, and social economic structure. Wai, or water, that was once thought of as an akua and a resource that helped shape our society, began to be commodified. I think decades later, the promise and progress of an unfettered tourist-based economy has transformed Hawaii into one of the most expensive places to live in the world. While the waste from this system has littered our streams, paved over our sacred places, damaged our precious marine ecosystems, and at times overrun our lives. The US military continues to be treated as a critical economic driver for Hawaii's economy. And I want to share this brief video that was done by some of my colleagues when we were in the Red Hill struggle. Let me know if you can hear it.
Actually, Dr. Beamer, it's not coming through.
The military is here to
Sorry, it's not coming through. Okay.
Not well, it's like in.
Well, okay, no problem. I think I have to change the sound settings, which is always very hard to do when I have it on share. So give me 1 second. Second, I will adjust the audio settings. There we go. I think it's because I have the background filter. Thank you for stopping me and letting me know. And maybe I can restart this video. Okay, I think this will work better now. Let's try.
It's constructed that the military is here to protect us, but we've been nothing but a target since they've arrived here. And it's very poignant that the Navy is poisoning our aquifer, because the Navy is actually the folks that overthrew our government on the USS Boston and pointed guns at our queen.
In 1965, the Navy decided to use this portion of the southwest coast of Ho'olawe to test the effects of a simulated atomic bomb.
We saw this crater, and it was like, couldn't believe our eyes that somebody, a bomb could do that.
When I went there, I cried. Every time I go there, I tear up.
There's a ship called the USS Arizona still leaking oil to this day. And the only reason why the United States military doesn't want to stop the oil leaking is because they want to commemorate it as a historical event that'll live on forever. So them continuing to poison our waters is something that they do to be patriotic towards the occupation of Hawaii.
The U.S. Navy have been poisoning the waters not just in Red Hill, but also the waters of Pu'uloa. The reason that it was called Pearl Harbor to begin with is because it was plentiful with pearl oysters and fish, and now it is home to 6 Superfund sites. They actually had to narrow it down from several dozen contaminated sites because of the military presence there. What was once one of the most abundant areas on the island is now one of the most contaminated sites on the planet.
At least 1,500 other families in Honolulu started seeing fuel in their water about 2 weeks ago. According to the Navy, the fuel came from the Red Hill Fuel Facility, which was built during World War II. That leaky fuel facility sits only 100 feet over a major aquifer that supplies water to Honolulu.
There is still at least 180 million gallons of fuel in those tanks right now that are supposed to be removed. They're supposed to have a plan in place by February 2nd. These tanks are in their end-of-life phase. Along a certain time horizon, there's a 100% chance that there will be a catastrophic failure. It would basically spell out the end of clean water and a way of life on Oahu as we know it.
And that video is a little, little dated, I think. Oops, sorry. How do I change the slide? Since that point, that period, we've emptied the tanks. I think over about 104 million gallons have been gone and removed, and they're working on the sludge. And I'll speak a little more about that. But while I believe that the enlightenment of any society is best measured by its relationship with water, how does a society treat and care for our most essential element for life? What we've seen in Hawaii is the plantation economy, the military, and the tourist-based economy structures have produced surplus and excess for a few, while vastly altering our ancestral landscapes, damaging our waters and food systems, and the health and well-being of Kanaka. Bombing lands and polluting waters, diverting streams for profit, and subsequently leaving behind desert where there was once a wetland. These economic systems and structures reshaped Hawaii's relationship with water, creating the tinderboxes for places like Lahaina to be fodder for catastrophe. And my tutu spent the final kind of years of her life in Lahaina. This is not far from her house, where my uncle Keola resides today. And luckily, we were blessed and saved, and many families were not. And I'm trying to, suggest that the relationships between our economic systems and structures and the plundering of our planet and our movement away from care and our love for Hawaii, set and framed these contexts. And I want to be clear, if so-called progress destroys the very systems that make life on our planet possible, it's not really progress. If we allow the US military to leak fuel into our aquifer, to poison the life-giving waters in the name of the uncompromising need for so-called national defense, what exactly are they defending? I think the world would agree that the poisoning of an aquifer is an act of terrorism. And the reality was, here in Hawaii, we had to face the military-industrial complex, its stranglehold on the politicians. Luckily, the media, over time became swayed and became a powerful factor. And we had to capture the hearts and minds of people. And so when we shut down the Red Hill fuel tanks, many people thought that was impossible. And in that, I had people literally tell me, "What are you going to do? These are generals. There's nothing you can do about it." But through that collective action together, the organizing, the speaking of truth to power, the courageous actors of people like Ernie Lau, Hawaii did something somewhat remarkable, and we still have to be vigilant, but decommissioning those tanks, draining them of 104 million gallons of fuel are small victories, I think. And so I find some strength in knowing that one answer to these multiple crises that our world faces is the same solution that my grandmother and people have been arguing for generations, and that's really is aloha aina. Oops, wrong slide. And so I'm sure we've heard this phrase, aloha aina. If we think about that child that you love and care for so deeply, that deep regard and care, that's a part of aloha aina, to think of aina as ancestor, and to be willing to care and to protect. And aina, if you see it translated, sometimes you see it translated as land, and maybe that's something to take from my talk. Aina doesn't equal land. So when we say land, oftentimes the connotations that come to mind are, private property, exclusivity, use of resources, access, fee title and transfer of land. And that's a different concept than aina. If you think of land as that which feeds, that relationship you have, the decisions that you make to care for her are going to be different than a piece of land. And so aloha aina has really helped to frame our kinship relationships to resources. It's defined kind of a responsibility to love, to serve, to honor that relationship and care. And and in Hawaii, it's really been this modern movement to respond to some of these extractive, damaging structures that our world faces. And here's an example. The beauty of aloha aina is it's people get it. I think we're looking for solutions to these struggles, and we're looking for care and connection. And in 2015, which is a decade ago now, over 2,000 people gathered, my beautiful, amazing friends at Paipai'oheia, that set out to restore that fish pond when it was completely full of mangrove and it looked impossible. They, in the early 2000s, set that out, and And by 2015, they were, organizing this big activity to close it. And I remember that day, buses bringing people in, just everyone lined and carrying buckets of rocks across, the way, and thousands of people. No one's getting paid. It was hot. It wasn't prime conditions. It was humid. But everyone was so happy, and there was, I swear, there was European languages on some sides, there was Asian languages. I mean, it was a diverse gathering and group of people that wanted to give back to Mother Earth. And that's the beauty of Aloha Aina. I hope you've heard of George Helm. This gentleman passed away in his, mid to late 20s of actively fighting, the U.S. Navy that was bombing Ko'olave, and, went through these deep, to me, spiritual revelations when he was there on the island. So these are quotes that actually come out of his journal. Can you imagine in the 1970s, their strategy was get on a fishing boat, get on surfboards, paddle to the island, and someone contact the Navy and tell them you can't bomb because we have people there. I mean, just amazing courage. And this is what he's writing while he's there occupying the island. He says, the truth is there's man and there's the environment. One does not supersede the other. The breath of man is the breath of Papa. The earth, man is merely the caretaker of the land that maintains his life and nourishes his soul. Therefore, Aina is sacred. The Church of Life is not in a building, it is in the open sky, the surrounding ocean, the beautiful soil. My duty is to protect Mother Earth, who gives me life, and to give thanks with humility, as well as ask for forgiveness for the arrogance and insensitivity of man. Powerful words. And he was lost at sea in March of 1977. So this Aloha Aina framework and system really allowed our ancestors to develop these regenerative co-management systems between people, ecosystems, and place. And I'm sure we've all kind of heard of the ahupua'a. And these were culturally appropriate, ecologically aligned, place-specific units, which gave people access to diverse resources. And I think this philosophy of Aloha Aina really enabled our people to set up and to frame these systems. So, we set up these Mauka watersheds, forests that were fed down into streams, into lo'i systems that went down into lokoi'a, these walled fish ponds. And I think that's something, that has improved over the last 30 years across Hawaii, has been the restoration of some of these ancestral systems where, like I'm going to mention He'ia again. If you've seen He'ia 30 years ago versus drive down it today, it's just the change is amazing, amazing. And so we have these reminders of what, like, our ancestors, the outcomes of Aloha Aina on our resources, on our systems to provide food that we can build upon for today. There was a lot of circularity in Hawaiian resource management, and I'll get kind of more into this, but wai, water, was seen as like a primary organizer. There was, in that system, there was these systematic and regular redistributions of wealth through this process called Kalai Aina that I'll talk about a little more. And I think this is really important. You think about some of the most remote islands in the planet. If all of the resources go to 0.1% of the population, there'd be radical imbalance here on the islands. And so mimicking that water cycle, our ancestors kind of understood that the economy is supposed to be like water, is supposed to flow. And there was these annual assessments of and availability of resources through makahiki. And, in that circularity, the system, that ahupua'a system itself, really emphasizes this kind of social, relational well-being over like individualistic of needs. So there's a lot of hope here. This is a colleague of mine, Natalie Kurashima. She published a great paper out of her thesis looking at the footprint of these ancestral systems, the Lo'i, Lokoi'a, and as well as agroforestry systems, Mala. And using only 6% of the land, our ancestors were able to produce enough food that could feed 86% of the population today. So that's pretty remarkable, the abundance of these systems, the productivity, and just as in comparison today, if you look at the agricultural uses of land, it uses about 4 times as much land, and we only produce roughly 13% of the food that we consume. And I think the most hopeful part of this is 71% of these ancestral land base and systems remain undeveloped today. So they're not all paved over and destroyed and gone, and we can look to them for feeding ourselves in today and in the future. So when our ancestors first came upon Hawaii, imagine being on canoes, sailing across the Pacific, following the stars, and eventually seeing birds, and coming upon our islands. They witnessed these high islands and the interaction of the wai and the water systems. And you can, if you have some time on certain days, just take a look at the clouds and how it interacts, with the mountains and the flow. It's like poetry, it's so amazing and beautiful. And I think this system of how the water interacted with our islands really became this organizing principle for our ancestors and framing up our economy. And in one of the papers that we published, as well as in some of the work that I've done, like across Europe and other places, we're talking about this ancestral circular economy that really has been informed by wai. So I'm so glad I'm assuming everyone knows the word wai and water. And if you say water, wai, that's wealth in Hawaii. And so what that insight is kind of telling us is that the economic system should flow like water. What should it do? It should be like, coming down on the mountains, spread nutrients across the aina, return into the ocean, and evaporate and recycle. And our ancestors created social systems and structures in some ways to try to mimic, I think, that principle. And so we had this kalai aina that, when there was, the passing of a chief, all the previous resource divisions that were distributed amongst the chiefs would return and go back, and then they would have to be redistributed again. The people had access to almost everything from Mauka to Makai, and so they created kind of this system, like it flows, and it comes back, and I think there's lessons to be learned and gained from that. And there's this annual kind of assessment through Makahiki where, leaders and people were going out on the aina and understanding the conditions of the place, the bounties, the problems, and, that enabled this kind of continued adaptation over time. And it was done to produce this state of wai, of wealth. And that's demonstrated in your ability to care and feed, the people, the community, and others. So the principles of the Hawaiian ancestral circular economy, I think one is around relationship building. The Ahupua'a system and the structure really facilitated the need for community and the relationships between people and place. You needed to have, I think when it worked well, you had sort of balanced governance structures. So again, the people had vast access to resources in place and knew the divisions intimately. The chiefs changed over time, their relationships to the place. And so when it worked right, you had this kind of balance of, I guess, bottom up and top down. You had this systematic and regular redistributions of wealth and power through this Kalai'aina system and structure. And the whole thing promotes sort of this regenerative social ecological processes. That we could have diverted all of the streams. Theoretically, if our ancestors had a different worldview and different value set, it could have been all about man. But that wasn't their framing through Aloha Aina. So trying to mimic the water cycle, trying to recognize our relationships to the species and biota around us, enabled us to try to build these systems that were, not solely focused on just people. They were regenerative in that sense. And I think this is a really important one, hard for some groups of people, some of my scientific friends, but environmental kinship. And again, I think, we have different worldviews. I learned this word when I was doing a talk at Oxford, cosmovisions. But seeing, our ancestors, seeing the Aina, seeing the environment as ancestor, I think produces a different result. When a tree isn't a commodity, but is a kupuna, you're going to interact with that resource differently. And yes, there are times you harvest it, you consume, but you're more thoughtful in that interaction. And I think, it's different than sort of kind of a capitalistic model. So, I think with the proper historical context and framing, we can see that, in Hawaii, this conception of ea, breath, life, and the philosophy of Aloha Aina really has been battling against the systems that are responsible for climate crisis, imperialist greed, and the arrogance of man for generations. Perhaps not everybody in Hawaii has joined, but every time an Aloha Aina stood up to try to stop an island or a piece of Aina from being bombed, restore a lo'i, or a fish pond, resisting a hotel, being built over the bones of our ancestors, we're essentially fighting these capitalist philosophies of endless development, of consumption, that's brought our planet to the brink of extinction. And so for generations, Aloha Aina were trying to wake other people up to the harsh realities that our world was heading in a terrible direction. They were trying to restore the systems that truly brought liberty, dignity, and abundance to our islands. And, similarly to George Helm, I think today we find ourselves up against incredible odds. And we see the unpredictability of very powerful actors in our world today, using tools and laws, let's just call them roughly laws, to produce harm and chaos and uncertainty. And I think if you look across, Hawaii today, anyone that's flown into Honolulu, you can see the fighter jets, the battleships of the United States that attach, themselves to our islands, and you can see the hodgepodge urban sprawl of the Honolulu skyline and the hotels that are increasingly threatened by sea level rise. So I advocate for organizing and trying to have collective systems of care for each other, for speaking the truth to power. And I want to say I haven't just done that as a professor or an author or an activist. I've also put myself in super uncomfortable positions. And I've spent 8 years on the Hawaii State Water Commission. Working within a system and structure that, to be honest, hadn't really worked and wasn't necessarily set up in a lot of ways to achieve justice for Hawaii. But we, because the commission was a possibility to implement the public trust, and because of the work of people before me in trying to carve out, traditional customary rights and these other things, the commission became a powerful vehicle for some of this restorative justice. And so I guess what I'm saying is like, we have to put ourselves in uncomfortable positions. Like, yes, we have to speak the truth to power. We have to understand our historical context, our collective love and care for each other. And then we got to, get outside of our comfort zones. And I'll be, it's over now, so I can speak more frankly. But, when I got on the commission, I think I was maybe one of the youngest, if not the youngest commissioners to ever be on there. I was the first Hawaiian in a very long time. It's changed significantly. In my time, we got Neil Hannes on the commission, and now Aurora Kagawa is on there. Yeah, it's it was a challenge, and there was times I really doubted, and I got questioned by people that I respect in my community. What are you doing? Like, why are you supporting this state structure? They're just, gonna use Hawaiian stuff against us. And there's a lot of uncertainty and threats when you put yourself in an uncomfortable position, when you get outside of your ideological protected space. It's very vulnerable. And so we did some good things. And, in my last speech on the commission, I talked about what an honor it was to restore all of these streams, but how we had not taken enough action on Red Hill. And I finished my term in June 2021. November was that huge leak in 2021 when people consumed the fuel. And so it was such a hard thing, to go through that process and then to get off the commission and see what was a completely avoidable crisis actually actualize in our islands. And I know this is also very uncomfortable for people, to question militarism. And I understand, my grandfather on my mom's side, he was a veteran. He fought in World War II. In fact, he passed away. His unit were a part of testing the atomic bombs on Johnston Atoll, and everyone in his battalion got cancer and died. And so my grandfather died in his early 50s. And so I get how the military provides opportunities for working class families. It's the one institution where you can get somewhat free college. In many ways, in terms of race, the military has a bond of family, across races. So there's a lot, I'm not attacking individuals or anything like that, but the system and the structure, that we have that produces, industries that destroy things, that kill people. I think we have to question that. And when we look at the origins of climate crisis, for instance, the Kyoto protocols that are almost becoming irrelevant because the current federal administration is kind of ignoring them. But even those ignored the military's use of fossil fuels, for instance. So it's something that we have to confront. And here in Hawaii, we with Red Hill, we saw a whole bunch of people organized together, and there were military wives on the side of Aloha Hawaiian activists, and so that kind of coalition didn't really exist before, but I think we have to build and strategize together. And this is the reality: is we're the last generation that can reverse climate crisis. And currently it's looking even more difficult, again, with, I think, some of the current administration and proclamations for more use of coal and other things. But I think it has to be all hands on deck. We have to kind of realize that now is the time. And in terms of, battling white supremacy, militarism, and the 1%, there's a lot of greenwashing where, it's important to reduce, recycle, reuse, all these principles of the circular economy. But there's also vast inequities across classes in terms of responsibilities for the climate crisis. And Oxfam has been doing really important work. We're seeing right now what we thought was, to me, at least I thought after George Floyd and 2020, we were confronting some of these systems and structures. I think right now in DC, they're because of influence from federal government, they're removing the Black Lives Matter promenade, and so again, we're in this really, really icky, difficult, challenging time. And that's the same for Hawaii. I think, we understand that although we've been talking about a diversified economy since the close of the plantation in the 1990s, we're still not doing very well. 88% of our food is imported. There's a vast outmigration of Kanaka, because it's vast socioeconomic inequalities, so hard to live and survive. And so sad, people move away, go Vegas. It's not the ninth island. Don't let them tell you that. And then they sing songs about wanting to come home, and so these are really critical issues that we have to kind of meet and address. Any day you can see the headlines like these that appear, but there's a lot of hope. And Aloha Aina, has been galvanizing change in our islands. And I think when we look at community-based subsistence fishing areas, these are sort of areas that are co-managed with the community, that take, input from communities to better manage their fisheries and resources. And we're seeing increase of biospecies and abundance in these areas. So that's helpful. Again, I think we have a lot of success in the biocultural restoration of social ecological systems, our lo'i, our fish ponds. I'm, again, being 47, when I was a kid, there were no charter schools. I just missed immersion. And so I didn't, get to go to fish ponds monthly, and some of these kids that are growing up today are so immersed, in these systems and bridging ancestral knowledge as well as, scientific analysis and principles in terms of what's happening in these natural systems. So there's been a lot of success and change, and I think wins there. And I think, although, after COVID, we all had that period, if everyone remembers, where the beaches were empty. And I think, they told us at one point you can't even go on the beach, and then people listened for like a week, and then we're like, this is ridiculous. And then, but we saw those return of natural species. I saw honu turtles, nesting in areas that I'd never seen before. The returns of white-tip lalakea sharks into areas, big piles of fish. And so, we're reminded these natural systems, they're incredibly robust. And if we can pivot and we can change, they return, fairly rapidly. So I did believe that coming out of COVID, we would, be further along in, revamping, I think, our tourist economy, but we have made some successes. Hawaii Tourism Authority has adopted a regenerative tourism model. There's more grants and resources going out to communities. Just this past legislative session, they passed the green fee bill that I think will be important, where at least there'll be an additional source of revenue for, hopefully for, certainly for conservation and hopefully for Aloha Aina programs that are restoring abundance to our communities. So I guess, the part of the challenge in taking on these structures and this historical legacy of injustice is, as an individual person, actor, it can feel overwhelming, and I think you have to kind of assess and account like the shifts and the successes that we've had over time. And I think these are some of those. So, bridging Aloha Aina and my work as an academic, I've been involved in these conversations around circular economy. I think it's an incredible time because the world, other than maybe the federal administration, United States right now, recognizes like we need new economic systems and structures, and that old, linear economy is producing the impetus for climate crisis. So instead of take, make, waste, and if you look around, I'm not sure if you're whatever room you're in, but I like to pick on iPhones or flat screen TVs, and I have them, right? But yeah, flat screen TVs. If you just think about how that's manufactured, right? Driven by the linear economy and the motivation for profit. Usually resources are mined in a country that doesn't have regulations to protect environmental rights as well as workers' rights. So people are paid, minimal amounts, and then they're produced in factories that, in a lot of instances, are now built in countries that again don't have environmental regulations. And so there's a lot of waste and damage that's done ecologically. And then the flat screen TV ends up in Costco. It's beautiful, the LG ones, you love them. You like the projection and the screen, and some of them are smart where you can move them around. But oftentimes they break in 4 or 5 years. And all of that, as soon as you buy it from Costco, the producer is done, right? I mean, motivation is done. I've generated my profit. That waste becomes someone else's problem, and it's dealt with in landfills, governments, counties, and you can just imagine for almost everything that we see around us, except for maybe some of the artisan handcrafted materials we have. This is the economic system that builds items and commodities, and it produces just crazy amounts of waste. And so I became really, inspired by some of the circular economy conversations, and thinking about, for the circular economy, it is about reuse of materials and products. It's about trying to decouple economic growth and environmental degradation. This is also being challenged in Europe. Some people aren't sure if it's even possible, but in any case, it's a great opportunity for us to engage in these global conversations around what our future economy should look like, and how do we make it more regenerative. So here in Hawaii, I think about give, take, regenerate. Old style fishing was you go out and you feed the ko'a, you take care of the fish. They used to give them like taro scraps, or you hear about pumpkin stuff, and then you go out and you harvest, and there is that reciprocal relationship. So on a high level scale, how do we reframe our economic structures and relationships to start with an input first, to start with the giving part before we extract? And that's, some of the hopes for that regenerative tourism model, for instance. Also been involved in working with Kate Rayworth. She's become a close friend, actually. And she has an incredible model called Donut Economics. I highly recommend, if you Google her, you can watch her TED Talk. But what Kate did was sort of look at, these structures for planetary health. And she realized that, scientifically, we're exceeding all of these planetary health boundaries, ecological ceilings and boundaries. And so, she looked at everything, and then she said, well, actually, instead of like an endless growth economy, we need to have an economy that sits in the middle of these donuts of health and well-being. And Kate's work's been just really awesome and fantastic. Again, my work is rooted in Aloha Aina. I feel like it has a lot of solutions for ourselves, I think for others in the world, but it doesn't have them all. And so that's where I'm, really open to collaboration and learning and understanding how other places in the world are trying to solve these problems. It doesn't mean that circular economy is the only option, but for me, it's been a powerful tool to get the status quo in Hawaii to recognize, like, wait a minute, we got to change our economic systems and structures, and this conversation is really happening all around the world. So this is some of our work and publications and kind of linking aloha aina and circular economies, in terms of Hawaii and water, I think we have a lot of opportunities there. This is out of my recent book, Hawaii Water and the Future of Hawaii. And this is in the final chapter, sort of the 7 things that we all can do as individuals to better our water future in Hawaii. And one is, to cherish and defend the water that surrounds you. It's really, really important, I think. I talk about in my book, water is like, it's like a person in your life. If you've lost someone in your family, a father, a mother, a grandparent, and you never, as much as you love them and you aloha them, when they're gone, there's parts of what they did in the world, in your family, that you never understood, and you see those gaps, and you feel it, right? And you really feel that loss. I think in some ways water is like that. It's very easy to underestimate, even though we say it's the most important resource. The way it's wasted, right? Our actions with it, we don't really know what we got until you're thirsty, right? And then everything changes. And another thing we can do for Hawaii is to let Hawaii flow. And we restored around 45 streams when I was on the commission. I think they've done 66 now. There's about 400 streams across Hawaii. So wouldn't it be a beautiful place if all of our streams flowed again? I think that would be a powerful thing for our communities. We got to reduce and reuse. So the reality is, with climate crisis and changing precipitation levels, in some areas of Hawaii, there is barely enough water to go around, like West Maui, for instance. And so we have to really support sustainable agriculture and gray water systems. We got to fabricate our homes so that we're not flushing prime drinking water through our toilets. Restore Waiwai, so support these efforts to create a regenerative circular economy. Kia'iwai, speak and act for future generations' rights to experience life in these islands. We got to think outside of our own, short time here in Hawaii, or as alive, and think about future generations. And the reality is, the water that we drink, when we were a kid, came before we were born, and at some point water is going to fall on our bodies that we're never going to consume, and so it really highlights to me that reciprocal relationship that we have. And kahuai, so support indigenous people's rights around the world, support courageous efforts for better governance, I think. And I think the last one is I talk about be like Hawaii. And the cool thing about the water system and cycle is, every time it changes form, it leaves behind its impurities or solids, right? And so sometimes it flows and it gathers and it collects heavy metals and junk stuff, but when it evaporates, it becomes pure again, right? And that system continues. And that's kind of like our lives, we make sometimes terrible mistakes, say hurtful, harmful things to people that we love, and that's a part of flowing. We can't stay pristine all the time, unfortunately, but we have to remind ourselves that like you got to bring your best water, you purify yourself. Think about that transition of evaporation of water that becomes clean and pure again, and how do we represent that in our lives and our relationships to each other. So I've seen the end of the road. And at the end of the road there's Aina. I think the rest of the talk, I kind of wanted to open it up more for conversations and questions. But I don't know what's at the end of your folks' road, but what are the structures or bumps that you can overcome to get there? And I think what are the collective overlaps that we can support each other? Aloha Aina challenges us to see the Aina as kin. It reminds us that we're all children of Mother Earth. It challenges us to focus on the relationships and fight for the structures that are at the root causes of climate crisis and injustice. And I think, while we're here, while we have this precious time, incredible privilege of living and existing in these islands, we have to try to better the conditions for our place and for our people. So if you want to learn more about some of my stuff, these are some of my books. You can check out, if you're more into history, it's No Mako Kamana. Sustainability stuff is in Islands and Cultures, and the Wai one is my new book on water. And again, my philosophy has been, to try to have Aloha Aina front and center and build these collective relationships around it. Again, because I believe Aloha Aina has many answers, but not all. And that's okay. That comes from a place of courage to say we can learn from other things and traditions around the world to solve our collective problems. And so here's some of my contact information. And I wanted to close before we go into conversations with, to me, an example of Aloha Aina. This was a song, is a song. It was written by my uncle Keola when I think he was 17. Wrote this song in the 60s called The Beauty of Mauna Kea, and it's mostly in English, but I think it conveys that Aloha Aina, that love and care and kinship relationship to a place and to a resource. And so I'm going to close just with a quick song. If you know it, feel free to hum or sing along. I live in Waimea. I raised my family here in the Malua Mauna Kea. I'm actually facing the opposite direction, but if I was to turn around, Mauna Kea is right behind me right now, and this is a view from my lanai. Hele ke no mai laika mauna ka mauna kiki. Iluna ku kila kila. Kila kila o luna. O luna ike au. Friend and I would sometimes roam trails of Mauna Kea. In the evening we'd come home, see her standing there. The moon moves around her when she sleeps. The clouds stand beside her when she weeps. And I could be forgotten and 1,000 miles away, still I would recall the beauty of Mauna Kea. Now to any land you go, she will be with you if you love her like I do. Mauna Kea. And I live in the city now. I see different things in the nights when I'm alone. She's in my dreams. The wind moves around her when she wakes. The sun spreads its warmth across her face. And I could be forgotten and 1,000 miles away. Still I would recall the beauty of Mauna Kea. Now to any land you go, she will be with you if you love her like I do. Mauna Kea. So, sing the songs of the places you love. Try to relish those moments, and I think cultivating love and understanding and our relationships to place in each other is a key role for Aloha Aina. So, mahalo for this time together, and willing to have a broader conversation and stories. So maybe I'll stop. Should I stop share and and we can open it up for questions.
Yeah, so I will moderate the questions. We have already received one, but before I go into questions, can we just get a visual mahalo for Dr. Limar? I know it's a little hard on Zoom for everybody to see every, if you were in a big space, we would all be clapping for you right now, so mahalo. So we did have one question come in our chat, and if you have a question for Dr. Beamer, go ahead and raise your hand if you can, or post it in the chat. So Ikaika Akiona has asked, kalo is grown on the west side of Kauai. Is diversion preventing that from happening on the west side of Oahu? That's a very technical question.
Good question. So no. Well, yes and no. There's some diversions in Waianae that are diverting flow and waters. Eric Enos out there has Ka'ala Farms and does grow kalo out on that side. But there was actually, I had a master's student from Waianae, Wahine Aipohaku. She did her master's thesis, and at one time in Waianae, there was about 400 acres of taro, believe it or not. So there's a lot of water that's out there. Some of it was spring fed, and in fact, a lot of leeward Oahu was full of springs. And so early on in that plantation economy that I talked about, there was a lot of wells that were drilled where there were springs. And over time, these wells pulled so much water that many of the springs on leeward Oahu don't flow anymore. Doesn't mean that they never would again. If we restore the aquifer and have better management practices, the springs will return, at least the ones that haven't been capped. But that's primarily the challenge for Oahu, leeward Oahu. It's kind of place specific though, but like I said, Uncle Eric guys are growing kalo on the leeward side of Oahu and Waianae. And there's a movement right now to try to get, I don't want to go into too many the weeds and technicalities, but there's different regimes of kind of management and rigor on the Water Commission. So there's areas that are designated and it kind of has heightened levels of management. Anytime someone wants to put a well in the ground in a designated area, there has to be a public hearing. And in non-designated areas, there doesn't have to be a public hearing. So all of Oahu is designated other than Waianae right now. And actually the Waianae folks have gotten together and are petitioning the commission to have Oahu, Waianae designated as a groundwater resource management area. And that would sort of heighten these levels of management and provide the community with more insight when wells and other things are being proposed. So I would support that. Yeah, good question.
Okay, a second question from Maggie Lee. What is your feedback on the future of reservoirs for water storage needs?
So there's some use for reservoirs. There definitely can be some use for reservoirs. But I think there's better ways to store water. The best storage is in the aquifer, to be honest. Yeah, there's some needs for reservoirs. I think in particular, if we could look at reservoir systems that utilize sort of pump storage, so like systems that also could generate power and energy that move water in between elevation areas. So, like one of the big problems for renewable energy is they call it carrying a base load. So this is part of the reason why Trump is saying use more coal to fund, to build the energy production capacity to carry for AI. And we don't want to, stay on fossil fuel systems. So pump storage has this capacity that we're, during the daytime, you use solar energy to move water up elevation slopes. And then, at nighttime, you run it down and you generate hydropower through a pipe. And that can be like a battery. So it can be a base flow and more consistent. It's really clean. And especially if it's piped, you're not losing water to evaporation. So I think those kinds of systems would be good. What we found on West Maui, particularly after the fires, and there was a whole bunch of just really manipulation of truth, and some newspapers, it's actually started with Civil Beat, suggested that our deputy Kaleo Manuel didn't put enough water into a reservoir to fight the fire and things, and so all of that became debunked, and it was completely false. But it had real political ramifications in the moment where he lost his job, and it actually kind of blamed taro farmers for for not being able to fight the fire, and so the question of reservoirs is sort of all I'm not sure where that question is coming from, but it can be wrapped in a lot of political situations. And of course we had the poor management of reservoirs, right? With the Fluger issue on Kauai, where a reservoir actually broke and people lost their lives. So yeah, so reservoirs are, they can be positive and utilized, but they have to be, I think, highly regulated. And again, the best reservoir for water to me is in the aquifer. And when we let the water flow through streams rather than diverting it into reservoirs, the streams are like the veins of the aquifer. So they're regenerating health and ecosystem productivity, across a whole range of services. So yeah, hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think so. We had another question from Edward Hanohano, who's asked, what are your thoughts on desalination of the ocean to usable water?
Sure. I think that's that's sort of like an end alternative, last worst case scenario in many ways. If we manage our freshwater resources better in Hawaii, if we change, impervious surfaces, even in rural, urbanized areas, restore stream beds and channels instead of areas that are all concrete that flush basically storm water and petroleum onto our reefs as quickly as possible. If we restore our, the watershed protections for our forests and stuff, we can capture a lot more rainfall and rainwater and have enough fresh water, I think, to sustainably provide for Hawaii. Desalinization. So part of the challenge is changing that mind frame that I had talked about. Some people look at water and water has been siloed. There's engineering sides of water. Talk about groundwater and surface water like they're two different things, and it's all part of the same resource. Again, stormwater. There's the cultural sides of water, legal sides, but the engineering kind of mindset around water sometimes looks at water as just like a bank account. So when someone discovers that there's more water that was found here on Hawaii Island, for instance, there's some evidence of these sort of super deep aquifers that actually, goes through the basal, goes through the salt water, and then way deep down, there's a whole nother layer of fresh water. We're understanding not a lot about this, but there is evidence of this here on Hawaii Island. And then oftentimes it turns to, oh, perfect, we got more water to use, like it's a bank that we can just keep kind of allocating out of. And I think part of that is changing the framework. Like, okay, wait a minute, like, just because we find the fresh water, it doesn't mean that it's a bank account for us to just spend down on, right? And so I see desalinization like that also. Oftentimes it's like, oh, we don't got to think about management of fresh water and these other things. We got desal, we got so much ocean, we can just keep using the ocean. But it's part of that same mentality of, consume, produce, more and more and more is better, and not really thinking about these relationships and the sanctity of them. There's real, sort of environmental risks with desalinization. There's this thing called brine that's basically a toxic substance that you have to figure out what you're going to do with it after you produce fresh water from salt water. So it comes with these environmental consequences and impacts that, the natural systems that I had talked about don't. And if we can better manage how we consume, how we conserve, how we, allow water to return into the aquifer by land management changes and practices, like I think that's a better alternative. And then there's the energy side to desalinization, right? I mean, a lot of energy goes into that processes, and so is that going to mean more burning of fossil fuels? And that gets us, back sort of in that wrong direction. But there are areas in the world, I think in Israel, for instance, they're principally relying on desalinization. So the technology does work, but it has environmental consequences and energy consequences we got to consider. And again, for our islands, like we're blessed with fresh water, so we got to just manage it better, manage our relationships to it better, not it. The water is going to do what it's going to do.
Okay, I have another question from Dawn, which actually kind of could segue about energy use. So she says, you opened with Tutu Pele, who is blessed Hawaii with abundant geothermal resources. Hawaii could have done much more to tap geothermal sooner, as other countries have done, like Iceland and New Zealand, especially given our clean energy goals. How would you position the development of geothermal in the content of Aloha Aina? Is it clean, renewable, and constant, like solar, unlike solar and wind? Yet there's a lot of misinformation that's impeded its development.
Yeah, highly contested here on Hawaii Island. And in fact, I think there's been some recent community sharing. I don't know what to call it. Fact finding or something that's been going on that I saw recently. And yeah, I think I've heard from people that say that come from Tutupele's clan and stuff that are adamantly opposed to geothermal. I think there are potential environmental issues that communities kind of have to look at. And then this is like if we had a Venn diagram, like yes, geothermal I think could be clean, could be renewable, but we start to layer the cultural and sort of community needs. I think that's where considering other alternatives to me would make more sense, like hydro pump storage that I had mentioned. Go in an area that's not gonna, hurt and offend people's religious practices and beliefs. And so for me, geothermal is not, it's like desalinization. I think it's probably like a last last alternative, not a primary alternative. But I think there's better technologies now that are less extractive. That maybe 40 years ago, geothermal seemed like the best option, but all across Austria, for instance, these hydro pump storage systems are super, super productive. And there's pretty much little to no waste and environmental degradation because the water can be in a closed system, and it's gravity. You utilize gravity, so you're not drilling into the Aina. You're not, I've heard cultural practitioners talk about the fear of like cooling the hotspot or damaging Tutupele. I mean, you don't have to deal with any of those cultural issues in something like pump storage. And all of our islands have vast elevation differences, right? I mean, geez, you could just use part of the slopes of Mauna Kea and produce a whole bunch of power. So I think there's that aspect, and then I think there's also the social economic equality aspect of energy that doesn't get discussed enough. In Germany, they passed a law that basically made it illegal for power companies to not allow people to produce renewable energies and to tie back into their grid systems. And the law required power companies to buy back power at a certain rate. So this produced a whole bunch of innovation. And you go through Germany today, it's wild. Like all of the barns are lined with PV. They're running sheep, under it. In some areas, they got cows, where the barns are lined with solar. The cows, come in through a certain area. All the kukai goes into these biodigesters. I visited one place called Wildspodried. It's in one of our publications where, they also have windmills. And so this one particular village, I think it was about 2,000 people. They collectively invested, 100 million euros, I think, to produce these power systems. And they were a farming community. And now, they make more money selling power back to the energy companies than they do in farming and agriculture. But what happened, that law, allowed for communities to innovate, to provide more ways to generate revenue. And so I think, that's something that Hawaii can learn from. So even if we think of things like geothermal, usually the big systems and structures are basically providing new alternatives for the same economic model and for the status quo. So I would love to see, a law that allows communities to produce power, and it had to change the business model for these power companies in Germany because they had to focus on the delivery of power rather than just the generation of it. And you could imagine like Hawaiian Homes communities putting up solar farms and selling it back to HECO and generating revenue, right? Just on the individual scale as families, like what if all of us could sell the power back, off our roofs? That could make a significant difference in our just personal family economic, structures. So those are the things that I try to think about. And there's also these microgrid systems that a lot of people are adapting to. So rather than this giant, power delivery model, smaller scale microgrids. But yeah, great question. I know geothermal is a hot, no pun intended, hot topic.
So I have another question that's maybe this was a good segue too about systems. So your story about the Paipai fish pond restoration and kind of the vision that someone had that then slowly but surely they implemented, and now we have a restored fish pond that has changed the landscape and is producing food for a community. And this our heavy reliance on outside imports in order to feed us, all of that. When you think about the systems, you talked about your working within a system, the Water Commission, but I also noticed that you also are pushing outside of the system, from as an outsider to the system with the Red Hill and that kind of thing. Do you have any wisdom for us about how we can work inside the system to enact change, but also remember to work outside the system to put pressure on it?
Yeah. Yeah. So the Red Hill one was, like I said, the timing was just very, I don't know how to explain it. For me, finishing 8 years on the commission, I first got on the commission in 2013, and then there was a big spill, 27,000 gallons, like almost right when I started as a commissioner. And so I went through 8 years of I actually was questioning the Navy. They came to hearings and, they told me things like, do you think we would poison our own people? We would never do this. We're a part of the community. We would never let this happen. This was one small mistake and, we got it fixed. It'll never happen again. And, oh man, there's so much that I can share. So yeah, and then I also saw, how hard it is to the power of that military industrial complex. And even though 27,000 gallons of fuel were spilled and there was this potential threat for people in the future that could, consume jet fuel, the politicians didn't want to hear it. I mean, and you can ask Marty Townsend and others, the federal delegation absolutely did not want to hear anything about Red Hill at that point. Our Water Commission wrote letters to the federal delegation, Obama, who was president at that time, saying that we didn't agree to the AOC, the authorization of consent agreement, that if our commission wanted to be a party, we had to agree that everything would be confidential and we couldn't disclose sort of the updates and the conversations, and we just thought that was not in the best interest of the public. So our commission didn't sign on to that AOC. And you also saw again, courageous actors, Ernie Lau and his leadership at the Board of Water. Even from that point, he was speaking out on it and he was talking about this potential threat. And when I started Waiwai Water and the Future of Hawaii, it was before, the 2021 leak happened. So we actually had a chapter in there. It's in there now from Board of Water, but it was written after that 2013 spill, and it talked about what could happen. And we're just about to finish the book, and then 2021 happens, and this huge spill, people consuming fuel, all the things that we had warned about and tried to stop took place, and everything the Navy, at least that I asked them on, was a lie. They absolutely lied to my face. The person that's stationed here, that is the communications officer, changes every couple of years, so you're always dealing with a different person. Yeah, so it was just really hard, and it's uncomfortable to be in these situations where you have some level of authority and leadership, but still you can't fix the things that you want to. it's not an envious position that I would want anyone that I love to be in. But then again, like I think you have to put yourself in these uncomfortable positions and then just be accountable and honest to your community and like, look, like I, I got these things done and this one I just couldn't get done. But after so I got out in June and in November that spill, happened. And I thought, okay, I'm off the commission now. I have a unique insight because I was in these hearings and they lied to my face. So I feel like I can, speak out and organize. And so that's really what drove that. Super uncomfortable. I'll be honest. I had an uncle call me and say, "Hey, you know what the Navy does? Yeah, they don't. They train to dispose of people. I mean, and so yeah, it was definitely uncomfortable. But I just felt it really had to be done, and people like Ernie Lau and Marty Townsend, when she was running Sierra Club, were doing it really actively. When I was on the commission in that system and structure, like I felt like I could only say so much. Otherwise, I would look like I was just an activist, and I wasn't being fair, or I wasn't respecting my sort of quasi judicial authority as a commissioner. But I think when it works best is when you have both inside and outside. So like to create this kind of systemic change, like we need both. So I was lucky when I left the commission, I still had a bunch of relationships with, both the staff and the commissioners. And so, I had privy and access to information and knowledge that might have been harder to get. And then, the community galvanized, right, around this issue. Just so terrible, But when you have that inside and outside together, I think you can get further. So sometimes we think about it as an either or, and I think it's a yes and. Like we need both, and it's really icky and it's hard because sometimes people are in systems and structures and they're not telling the truth, and they, you lose their integrity and I can see how, if there's benefits to towing the line for the status quo, so yeah, so it's very, very difficult, but that's where I think Aloha Aina, like if you have people inside and outside on these positions that truly, like, this is our political philosophy, this is our mandate, then it's less about identity politics, there's whatever, someone's a Hawaiian, it's more around, okay, wait, like, are we achieving the outcomes for Aloha Aina through your leadership right now? Because if we're not, then, that it doesn't matter our identities, I think, in some ways. But yeah, super good question, super hard. I wish I had the answer. But
That was a great answer. Thank you. Appreciate it. And then I have one more. Does anyone else have a question? If you want to raise your hand or put it in the chat, I'd be happy to call on you. I have, Bree.
I do, Judge. This is maybe less a question or more a comment. Well, a few things. I mean, I think some of us who sit inside the church sit very uncomfortably, given its history here, and now the rise of Christian nationalism. It's hard to toe the line inside, wanting to change it. But mostly, I just want to say gratitude. In the Christian tradition, there's a proverb: "Without a vision, the people perish," and it can be so easy to kind of, at least in my experience, sort of throw up my hands of like capitalism, like the vision of capitalism. It's like too powerful. And to hear an alternative vision like yours is life-giving. I mean, I don't even know the right word, but it's such a sacred work. And I know it probably has exacted a lot from you. But I just am so grateful that you have spent such an effort to put this the vision into the world. So mahalo.
Mahalo, Brianna. It's it's my grandmother before me. It's uncles and community, people around me, all of us together, and I think we all have sort of different. The privilege of being a professor is, I have. I have a platform in some ways. I have a responsibility to Hawaii, to me, that I think our community should decide. Like Hawaii deserves the best global practices here, to care for our resources, to care for our people, whether that be through education, through healthcare, energy, economics. Like we deserve the best, and I feel like part of my role as a professor, at least, is I can invest the time and energy to try to understand how other parts in the world are grappling with some of the same challenges that we face, and then understanding, having the privilege of being my grandmother's grandson and being rooted in our culture, trying to see where the value sets align, and then propose alternate visions. I think that's what Hawaii deserves. So it's an honor and a privilege to try to do that. And so thank you for that recognition and shout out. And yeah, I mean, I think everything is susceptible to I think we call it greenwashing, kind of in the climate areas. But you mentioned Christian nationalism, and it's not okay when people take value systems and things that are built around love and care and sacrifice and weaponize them for political purposes. That happens sometimes in Hawaiian spaces too, and I recognize how uncomfortable and difficult that is. So mahalo for calling that out as well.
That's Dr. Beamer. I wanted to point to something you had said about the commodification of vai and the idea that vai is also akua, and point out that in many ways that Christian nationalism is the commodification of akua, of keakua, right? And so to segue to what we as Episcopalians living in Hawaii can do, your book is a call to action. And so do you have any ideas specifically for us as Christians, what action we should be taking aside? I know you had those 7 or 9 different vai actions. Is there anything specifically as Christians we should be looking at?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think about a year ago, I did, so Church of the Crossroads, they have like a endowment thing. They selected me as one of their Watara chairs, I think it was called. And so I had to do a series of talks for them. And then one of my asks for them was like, okay, like, I don't need help in dealing with the politicians, like individually, or, I don't need help organizing the community, but we do need like new inroads, new flows, new flows. And so one thought that I had was like, yeah, why is across different religious, spiritual traditions, usually water has some sanctity. And I kind of thought like in that Red Hill struggle, we're further along now than we were a year ago, but yeah, like I don't know if there could be a collective, like, spiritual statement, or, I talked about like maybe we could do like a declaration, or, like get some of the Shinyuan Buddhist tradition, some of the different aspects of Christianity, just to talk about the sacredness of Hawaii, and a big part of my book is just, it shouldn't be controversial to say like, if whatever the system and structure, like if it's damaging our water for the future of life, like it's not good. I don't care if it's military or, agricultural practices, like this is water, guys. Like this is the thing that scientists search for in the universe for life, and we have to care for it. So I don't know if that's possible. I don't understand the politics across different, facets of Christianity or, between Buddhism and Christianity and stuff. But I think that could be like a powerful statement, is just like this collective statement around the sanctity of water and the need to care for it, for our islands. Sorry, that's kind of a weird, huge idea, but
Oh, it's a great idea. That's a great idea. And I think there was some collective action, faith action around Red Hill, back during the pandemic time, kind of when we were all doing things online. So that is a great suggestion for us. Mahalo. Is there anyone else who has any other questions? If not, we'll just say another huge mahalo to you, Dr. Beamer. So let's go ahead and do another huge mahalo. Thank you. Mahalo so much. We are fortunate and lucky to have you, and everyone go out and check out his book.
yes, mahalo nui. Pleasure to engage with you folks virtually. I hope to meet each other in person at some point. So yeah, mahalo for all you do. I think people's faith and spirituality are so critical for grounding us through tough times and keeping us close to the things that are important. So just want to mahalo you folks for that, and thank you for the time.
Okay. And let us close us in prayer. E pule kako. Good and loving God, creator of heaven and earth, we give you thanks for this time we've had together. We give you thanks for Dr. Beamer and his work and all those who are working to Malama Aina, to Aloha Aina. We ask that you give us strength to live out your vision for our collective reactivation, restoration of what you have created. We ask that you help us to turn our hearts to you as we continue our work to guard life and be your stewards of this world. In your son's name we pray. Amen. Oh, mahalo. So don't forget our next speaker. Bree, do you want to remind us our next speaker?
July 26th, again, a Saturday at 9 a.m. It's Rachel Tabor Hamilton, a Shaka First Nation person, also an Episcopal priest.
Okay. Mahalo, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Beamer. Thank you so much.
Thank you.